Some ancient people blew into instruments shaped like human skulls to make sounds that mimicked death screams. Imagine opera singers, but their voices were not trained. They were surgically altered when they were boys to stay high and powerful forever. Ancient Greek musicians sometimes played wind instruments so fiercely they had to wear leather straps around their heads to stop their cheeks from bursting. There was once a popular instrument made of spinning glass bowls that people claimed could make listeners go mad or even talk to ghosts. Number 9. The screaming skulls that sounded like humans suffering. Deep in archaeological sites in Mexico, researchers found something truly unsettling. They weren't weapons, not exactly. They were small ceramic objects, often shaped like human skulls or the heads of terrifying animals. For a long time, people thought they might be toys or decorations. Then someone tried blowing into one. The sound that came out was not music as we know it. It was a shriek, a chilling wail that sounded like a human in agony, or the roar of a predator, or the howling of a fierce wind. These are often called Aztec death whistles, though their exact origins span several Mesoamerican cultures, some predating the Aztecs by centuries, with examples found dating back to around 650 AD. Imagine standing on a battlefield or in a solemn ritual and hearing dozens, maybe hundreds of these whistles all at once. The noise would have been beyond frightening. Experts who have studied and recreated these instruments describe the sounds as capable of producing a wide range of disturbing effects. Some create a noise similar to a human scream, hitting frequencies that trigger a primal fear response in our brains. Others can produce a sound like a harsh, gusting wind or the growl of a jaguar. The designs are ingenious. The way air is forced through specific chambers and openings creates these complex dissonant noises. Some even have multiple chambers that can produce varying tones simultaneously, creating a chaotic and unsettling soundscape. Why would anyone make such a thing? The exact purpose is still debated because no written records from the time explicitly describe their use. Context of where they were found gives us clues. Many were discovered in burial sites, particularly at the temple of the wind god Ixecatl in Tlatelolco, a major Aztec city. This suggests a connection to rituals involving death, the underworld, or perhaps communication with wind deities. Some scholars propose they were used during human sacrifices, the screams of the whistles amplifying the horror of the event. Others believe they were used in warfare to terrify enemies before an attack, a kind of psychological weapon. The sound of 100 screaming skulls coming at you through the jungle would surely break anyone's resolve. What makes them so different from anything today is their raw, visceral impact. Modern music often seeks harmony, melody, rhythm. These whistles seem designed purely for emotional and psychological effect, specifically fear and awe. They weren't meant to be listened to for pleasure, but to be experienced. The tradition of making and using these specific sound artifacts faded after the Spanish conquest in the 16th century as indigenous cultures and their practices were suppressed. While similar noise-making instruments exist in various cultures, the specific acoustic properties and terrifying artistry of these Mesoamerican whistles remain unique. Today, artists and engineers create replicas, and hearing them even in a recording can send a shiver down your spine. To truly understand their power, you'd have to imagine them in their original terrifying context, a sound wholly unlike any musical tradition we cherish now. The sound itself was a statement, a raw emotion given audible form, a forgotten language of fear. Number 8. The ghostly instrument banned for driving people mad. Picture this. Benjamin Franklin, the famous American inventor and statesman, is in England. He attends a concert featuring music, played on tuned wine glasses. And he's fascinated. But he thinks this could be better, more efficient. So, in 1761, he invented the glass armonica, or harmonicon. It was an elegant contraption. It consisted of a series of different-sized glass bowls, nested tightly together and mounted on an iron spindle that turned with a foot pedal like an old sewing machine. The player would wet their fingers and touch the rims of the spinning bowls, producing clear, ethereal, bell-like tones. It was an instant hit. The sound of the glass harmonica was truly like nothing else. It was described as celestial, haunting, and incredibly penetrating. Because the bowls spun continuously, the player could create sustained notes that seemed to hang in the air, weaving melodies that sounded like they were coming from another world. It was said to be so pure and beautiful that it could move listeners to tears. Composers like Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Ludwig van Beethoven, Gaetano Donizetti, and Richard Strauss wrote music for it. It became popular in public concerts and private homes across Europe and America. Franz Mesmer, the physician whose work led to the term mesmerism, even used the glass harmonica during his controversial therapeutic sessions involving animal magnetism, claiming its sounds enhanced the healing process. But then, things took a strange turn. People started to whisper that the glass harmonica was dangerous. Rumors spread that its eerie sounds could negatively affect the human nervous system. Players reported feeling dizzy, depressed, or agitated after long sessions. Some listeners claimed it made them melancholic, or even caused convulsions. In some German towns, it was reportedly banned by the police because it was thought to disturb the peace, or more alarmingly, incite madness. There were stories of people fainting, of animals becoming distressed, and even suggestions that the instrument could awaken spirits or cause marital discord. One German musicologist, Friedrich Rochlitz, writing in the late 18th century, warned that the harmonica excessively stimulates the nerves, plunges the player into a nagging depression and hence into a dark and melancholy mood that is an apt method for slow self-annihilation. Why did it get this reputation? Several theories emerged. One was that the constant, high-frequency vibrations directly affected the nerves in a harmful way. Another pointed to the lead content in the glass used at the time. Players might have been absorbing lead through their wet fingertips. Some suggested that the instrument's ability to produce very subtle differences in pitch, microtones, could be disorienting to the human ear, which is accustomed to more standard musical intervals. Or perhaps it was simply the uncanny, otherworldly nature of the sound itself that unsettled people in an era less accustomed to such timbres. The instrument was also quite fragile, difficult to keep in tune, and its delicate sound was eventually overshadowed by louder, more robust instruments like the pianoforte. By the early 19th century, the glass harmonica had largely faded from popularity, taking its uniquely ghostly voice with it. Though it's seen a minor revival in modern times, the sheer strangeness and the unsettling myths surrounding its original heyday make it a lost sound that once captivated and terrified in equal measure. Number 7. The angelic, alien voices of men, who were never meant to sing so high. For nearly 2 centuries, from the early 1600s to the late 1700s, some of the most celebrated and highest-paid opera singers in Europe were men who sang in voices that sounded like women's, but with a power and breath control that was almost superhuman. These were the castrati. To achieve this unique vocal quality, these singers underwent a brutal surgical procedure before puberty, usually between the ages of 7 and 12. The operation, castration, prevented their larynx or voice box from growing larger and their vocal cords from thickening as they would during normal male development. As a result, they retained the high vocal range of a boy's soprano or alto, but as their bodies grew to manhood, their chests and lungs developed adult size and strength. The sound they produced was reportedly astonishing. Contemporary accounts describe their voices as angelic, ethereal, silvery, and otherworldly. They combined the high, flexible pitch of a female soprano with the lung capacity and muscular power of an adult male. This allowed them to sing incredibly long, complex musical phrases in a single breath, execute dazzlingly fast passages and trills, and project their voices with immense volume in large opera houses without amplification. Composers like George Frideric Handel, Nicola Porpora, and Johann Adolf Hasse wrote demanding and virtuosic roles specifically for star castrati, such as Farinelli, whose real name was Carlo Broschi, Senesino, Francesco Bonarna, and Caffarelli, Gaetano Maggiorno. These singers were international superstars, earning fortunes and commanding adulation from audiences who were captivated by the beauty, agility, and sheer uniqueness of their voices. Farinelli, perhaps the most famous of them all, was said to have a vocal range of over 3 octaves and could sustain a note for an astonishing length of time. Practice of castration for musical purposes was centered in Italy, though castrati performed all over Europe. It was technically illegal and condemned by the church, but it was an open secret, often justified by fabricated medical necessities or accidents. Many boys, often from poor families, were subjected to the procedure in the hope of a lucrative career. For every star, however, there were many more whose voices didn't develop as hoped, or who didn't achieve fame and faced difficult lives. The sound of the castrati was unlike any natural adult male voice, and distinct from female voices too. It occupied a unique sonic space, described as having a certain sweetness and brilliance combined with extraordinary power. The tradition began to decline in the late 18th century. The Enlightenment brought changing ethical sensibilities, and the practice of castration was increasingly viewed as barbaric. Musical tastes also shifted. Brasseria, the genre where castrati reigned supreme, gave way to styles that favored more natural voices, including the rise of the heroic tenor. By the early 19th century, castrati were no longer being created for the opera stage, though some continued to sing in church choirs, particularly the Sistine Chapel Choir in Rome, until the practice was officially banned there in the early 20th century. The last known castrato to perform publicly and be recorded was Alessandro Moresi, who made several recordings between 1902 and 1904. While these recordings give us a faint echo, Moresi was past his prime, and recording technology was primitive. The true, glorious and unsettling sound of the castrati in their heyday, a sound born of great talent and a terrible sacrifice, is largely lost to time, existing only in written descriptions and the imaginations of those who read them. It was a vocal tradition that created sounds humans were, by nature, never meant to produce. Number 6. The lost rhythms and voices of medieval love songs. Imagine wandering through southern France or northern Italy in the 12th or 13th century. You might hear a captivating sound drifting from a castle courtyard or a bustling town square. It could be a lone singer accompanying themselves on a stringed instrument, or perhaps a small group of musicians. They are performing the songs of the troubadours and quatrains, poet-composers who created the first large, sophisticated body of secular songs in a vernacular language, Old Occitan for troubadours, Old French for quatrains. In Western Europe, their music was all about courtly love, chivalry, political commentary, satire, and personal laments. We have hundreds of their poems and melodies, painstakingly written down in beautiful manuscripts. But how did they actually sound? That's a huge puzzle. The melodies that survive are mostly monophonic, meaning a single melodic line. The notation used, often forms of neumes, the same little squiggles used for early Gregorian chant, gives us the shape of the melody, which notes go up, which go down, but it's often maddeningly vague about rhythm. Were these songs sung in a free speech, like rhythm, flowing with the poetry? Or did they have a more regular metered pulse, perhaps influenced by dance rhythms? Scholars have debated this for decades, and different modern performance groups will play the same troubadour song in radically different ways. Some opt for a very measured, almost mathematical approach based on theories of poetic meter. Others go for a more intuitive, improvisational feel. Then there's the question of accompaniment. The manuscripts rarely specify what instruments, if any, should be used. We know from illustrations, literary descriptions, and surviving instruments that medieval musicians had access to viols, medieval fiddles, lutes, harps, flutes, bagpipes, shawms, a type of oboe, and various percussion instruments like drums and tambourines. Did troubadours usually sing solo, perhaps plucking a lute? Or were they backed by a lively ensemble? It likely varied. Some songs might have been intimate and reflective, others boisterous and public. The vocal style itself is another mystery. Was it a refined, almost classical sound, or something more robust and folk-like? Were there specific vocal ornaments like trills or slides that were commonly used, but not written down? These were oral traditions first and foremost, and so much of the performance practice would have been learned by ear, passed down from master to student, not explicitly notated. The world of the troubadours, particularly in southern France, was severely disrupted by the Albigensian Crusade in the early 13th century, which devastated the region and scattered its courts and patrons, while the Kyrd tradition in the north continued for a while longer. Musical styles inevitably evolved. The very way music was thought about and written down changed over the centuries. So while we can read the beautiful poetry of Bernard de Ventadorn or Adam de la Halle, and we can see the melodic outlines they, or their scribes, left behind, the full sonic experience, the exact timbre of the instruments, the nuances of the vocal delivery, the rhythmic subtleties that gave the music its life and character, is large lost. Modern performers make educated guesses, drawing on historical research, ethnomusicology, and their own artistic instincts. They bring these ancient songs back to life. But it's an interpretation, a reconstruction. The original pulse, the precise inflections, the living breath of these medieval love songs as they first echoed through castles and towns, remains an elusive and tantalizing whisper from the past. Number 5. The floating voices of monks we can't quite recreate. Step into a stone monastery, dimly lit by flickering candles. Sometime around the 9th or 10th century, you hear voices, male voices, singing in unison. The sound seems to float, to hang in the air, pure and unadorned by instruments. This is Gregorian chant, the sacred music of the Western Roman Catholic Church. It's monophonic, a single melodic line carrying Latin texts from the liturgy. For centuries, this music was the bedrock of Western classical music. The way it was sung in its earliest forms, before it was standardized and written down in the staff notation we recognize today, is a sound we can only approximate. Early Gregorian chant was transmitted orally. Monks learned these complex melodies by ear, memorizing hundreds, even thousands of them. First attempts to write it down used little symbols called neumes. These neumes, placed above the text, were like musical shorthand. They could show if the melody went up or down, if a note was to be sung with a quiver, a quilisma, or a particular emphasis. Some neumes might have indicated subtle rhythmic nuances like a slight lengthening or quickening of a note, or a particular way of connecting notes smoothly. However, these early neumes were often adiaspematic, meaning they didn't indicate precise pitches or exact rhythmic values. They were more like a memory aid for someone who already knew the tune. choirmaster looking at these neumes would know the melody, and the neumes would remind him of the subtle inflections and expressive details. The problem is, we don't have those choirmasters anymore. We can look at the same neumes, but we don't have the living oral tradition that unlocked their full meaning. Over time, different regions developed their own styles of chant. Gallican chant in France, Mozarabic chant in Spain, Old Roman chant in Rome itself. Around the 8th and 9th centuries, under rulers like Charlemagne, there was a push to standardize the liturgy and its music across the Frankish Empire, favoring the Roman chant tradition. This led to more systematic attempts at notation. Guido of Arezzo, around the 11th century, was a key figure in developing a system with horizontal lines, a precursor to the staff, that helped specify pitches more clearly. But as notation became more precise in pitch, some of the subtler, rhythmic and expressive details possibly conveyed by the older neumes might have been lost or transformed. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the monks of Solesmes Abbey in France undertook a massive project to study old manuscripts and restore Gregorian chant. Their influential work led to the widely used Solesmes editions, and a particular style of singing chant often characterized by a smooth, flowing rhythm, with equal note values, though with subtle elongations, at phrase endings. This has become, for many, the sound of Gregorian chant. However, some scholars argue that earlier chant might have had more rhythmic variety, perhaps more closely tied to the accents of the Latin text, or even incorporating elements of proportional rhythm, where notes have different defined lengths. The exact vocal timbre is also hard to pin down. How did these monks produce their sound? Was it a light, ethereal tone, or something more robust and full-bodied? We can make educated guesses based on acoustics of old churches and descriptions, but we can't hear it directly. So, while we can still hear Gregorian chant performed beautifully today, the precise way those ancient melodies first breathed, with all their original nuanced inflections and the specific vocal colors of centuries ago, remains an echo, a profoundly spiritual sound whose earliest form dances just beyond our full grasp. Number 4. The animal-headed horn that screamed across Celtic battlefields. Imagine yourself as a Roman legionary standing in formation deep in the forests of Gaul or the misty highlands of Britain, around 100 BC. Suddenly, a sound rips through the air, unlike anything you've ever heard. Not just loud, it's wild, terrifying, almost bestial. Looking towards the enemy line, you see them, tall bronze horns held aloft, their bell ends shaped like the snarling heads of boars or fierce wolves, their tongues sometimes articulated to move. This was the carnix, the ancient Celtic war horn. Carnix was a remarkable instrument, both visually and orally. Typically made of beaten bronze sheets, it was an S-shaped trumpet, often standing taller than a person when held upright for playing. The mouthpiece was at the lower end, and the sound projected out from the animal head at the top, often designed with striking details like enameled eyes or bristling manes. Its purpose was clear: to intimidate enemies in battle and to rally Celtic warriors. Roman writers like Diodorus Siculus described the Celts' use of such horns, noting their harsh, terrifying sound that amplified the din of battle. It was a key part of Celtic psychological warfare. What did it actually sound like? For a long time, this was a matter of speculation based on these historical descriptions and the few surviving fragments of instruments. No complete carnix was known until the discovery of the Desford carnix in Scotland in 1816, a boar-headed example. Even then, it was incomplete. However, further archaeological finds, most notably the Tintignac carnixes found in France in 2004, a hoard including several almost complete examples, have allowed for much more accurate reconstructions. Music archaeologists and musicians have worked together to build playable replicas. When these reconstructed carnixes are played, they produce a range of sounds that are indeed powerful and unsettling. They can create deep, resonant tones, but also higher, more piercing notes, and even dissonant growling or roaring effects depending on the player's technique and the specific acoustics of the instrument's head. Some experts suggest that, played by skilled musicians, they could even produce simple melodies or rhythmic signals. The sound was unique, not just because of its volume or timbre, but because it was intrinsically linked to its fearsome appearance. The sight of a boar's head seemingly roaring at you from above the enemy ranks, combined with the unearthly sound, would have been deeply unnerving. This wasn't music in the sense of entertainment. It was a tool of war, a broadcast of ferocity and intent. The tradition of the carnix flourished from around 300 BC to about 200 AD. As Celtic cultures were gradually subsumed by the Roman Empire, and later by other societal changes, the carnix, along with the specific military traditions it served, fell out of use. The knowledge of how to make them and the specific playing techniques were lost. While modern reconstructions give us a thrilling glimpse into this ancient sound world, we can't fully recollect the raw, terrifying impact of dozens of these instruments blaring across a chaotic Iron Age battlefield, a sound designed to fill hearts with dread and signal the onset of brutal conflict. Precise way they spoke in the heat of battle, the nuances of their signaling language remain largely buried with the warriors who once wielded them. Number 3. The thunderous water organ that shook Roman arenas. Imagine sitting in a vast Roman amphitheater, perhaps the Colosseum itself, waiting for the gladiatorial games or a public spectacle to begin. Suddenly, a powerful, majestic sound fills the arena, far louder and more complex than any lyre or flute. This is the sound of the hydraulis or water organ, one of the most impressive and technologically advanced musical instruments of the ancient world. Invented by the Greek engineer Ctesibius of Alexandria in the 3rd century BC, the hydraulis was a true marvel. It was the world's first keyboard instrument and a direct ancestor of the modern pipe organ. What made the hydraulis unique was its ingenious wind supply mechanism. Instead of relying on human-powered bellows that could provide an uneven airflow, Ctesibius used water pressure to deliver a steady and consistent stream of air to the pipes. The system involved a cistern of water, a submerged bell-shaped chamber, the penagus, and hand pumps. Air was pumped into the penagus, displacing water and compressing the air trapped inside. This compressed air then flowed to the pipes when keys were pressed on a keyboard. This constant pressure allowed for a sustained, strong sound, much more powerful than could be achieved with simpler wind instruments of the time. The hydraulis could have multiple ranks of pipes, each producing different timbres or pitches, allowing for complex musical performances. The sound of the hydraulis must have been extraordinary for its era. Writers like Cicero and Lucretius mentioned its captivating tones. Hero of Alexandria, another Greek engineer, described its construction and operation in detail. It was clearly loud enough to be heard in large public spaces like theaters, arenas, and during imperial ceremonies. It was a prestigious instrument, associated with wealth and important events. Some Roman emperors like Nero were reportedly keen players and patrons of the hydraulis. Archaeological evidence, including a remarkably well-preserved example found in Aquincum, modern Budapest, Hungary, from 228 AD, and depictions on mosaics and coins confirms its widespread use and sophisticated construction. Aquincum organ had 3 ranks of pipes controlled by a keyboard, and a 4th rank played by stopping holes, suggesting a versatile instrument capable of a rich sound. So why don't we hear the hydraulis today in its original form? The technology was complex. Maintaining a hydraulis required specialized knowledge. With the decline and eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century AD, much of this advanced technical know-how was lost in Europe. The infrastructure needed to build and maintain such instruments, along with the societal structures that supported their use in grand public spectacles, crumbled. While the concept of the pipe organ survived and eventually re-emerged in medieval Europe, using bellows for wind, the pneumatic organ, the specific water-powered technology of the hydraulis largely disappeared for centuries. Modern reconstructions have been built, based on archaeological finds and ancient descriptions. These replicas can produce powerful and impressive sounds, giving us an idea of its capabilities. However, the exact timbre, was there a subtle, watery quality to the sound due to the regulation mechanism, or was it simply a very stable version of a pipe organ sound? The thunderous voice that once filled Roman public life has become a fascinating echo, a testament to ancient ingenuity whose original sonic signature is largely lost to the currents of time. Number 2. The screaming pipes of ancient Greece that drove people wild. In ancient Greece, if the lyre represented order, reason, and the calm worship of Apollo, then its wild, passionate counterpart was the aulos. This was not a gentle flute. It was a powerful double-reed wind instrument, more like an oboe or a clarinet, and it was usually played in pairs, one aulos for each hand. The sound of the aulos was described as penetrating, exciting, and capable of stirring strong emotions, even inducing ecstatic or trance-like states. It was the instrument of Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and ecstasy, and it played a central role in many aspects of Greek life, from religious ceremonies and dramatic performances in theaters to raucous parties, athletic competitions, and even military marches. The aulos player, or aulites, was often a highly skilled professional. Playing the aulos was physically demanding. Pressure required to make the reeds vibrate and produce a strong sound was so great, the players often wore a phobia, a leather strap that went around the head covering the cheeks and mouth, with holes for the instrument's mouthpieces. This strap helped support the cheek muscles, prevent them from overinflating or even bursting, and allowed the player to maintain consistent air pressure for extended periods. Imagine seeing a musician with their face strapped up, intensely blowing into two pipes, their body swaying with the rhythm. It must have been a dramatic sight. The sound itself could be complex. Playing two pipes simultaneously allowed for the possibility of playing a melody on one pipe and a drone or a harmonizing part on the other, or even creating beating effects between slightly detuned pipes for a buzzing, intense timbre. Greek musical theory also included microtones, intervals smaller than a semitone, and different modes, like Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, each believed to have a distinct ethical character or emotional effect. The aulos, with its flexible pitch, was well suited to exploring these subtle sonic shades. Ancient writers like Plato and Aristotle had strong opinions about the aulos. Plato, in his Republic, famously wanted to banish most forms of aulos music from his ideal state, considering its sound too orgiastic and disruptive to rational thought, preferring the more restrained lyre. Aristotle was slightly more accommodating but still cautioned about its powerful effects, suggesting it should be used for catharsis rather than education. These concerns themselves testify to the potent impact the aulos' sound had on listeners. It wasn't background music. It was an active force. It was used in the corybantic rites, ecstatic mystery cults, where music and dance were used to achieve a state of divine frenzy. In Greek tragedy, the aulos accompanied the chorus, heightening the emotional drama of the plays. So what happened to this rock and roll instrument of the ancient world? As Greek civilization gave way to Roman, and Roman civilization itself eventually declined, musical tastes and practices evolved. The intricate knowledge of Greek modes, microtonal tunings, and the specific playing techniques for the aules gradually faded. While reed instruments continued to exist and evolve into modern oboes, clarinets, and bagpipes, the specific sound and cultural significance of the ancient Greek aulos were lost. We have archaeological finds of aulos pipes, often made of wood, bone, or ivory, and depictions in art, but reconstructing their exact sound is challenging. The reeds, crucial for sound production, rarely survive. Precise fingerings, breath control techniques, and improvisational styles are unknown. Modern researchers and musicians build replicas and experiment, trying to coax out sounds that match ancient descriptions. The authentic, electrifying shriek of the aulos that once filled Greek theaters and temples, that drove people to dance in ecstatic abandon or contemplate the heights of tragedy, is a sound that now exists primarily in our historical imagination, a wild cry from a distant past. Number 1. The world's first written songs we can barely hear. Travel back in time, not just centuries, but millennia. Go to ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the cradle of civilization. Here, in Sumer, Babylonia, and Assyria, people were not only inventing writing, building cities, and developing laws, they were also making sophisticated music, and incredibly, they were writing some of it down. We are talking about the earliest known forms of musical notation, dating back as far as the 2nd millennium BC, and evidence of musical instruments and practices going back even further to the 3rd millennium BC. This is the very dawn of recorded musical history. The most famous pieces of evidence are the cuneiform tablets. These clay tablets, inscribed with wedge-shaped marks, contain a wealth of information about Mesopotamian life, including hymns, poems, and remarkably instructions related to music. Some tablets describe tuning systems for stringed instruments, most notably lyres and harps. They reveal that these ancient musicians understood concepts like diatonic, 7-note, scales similar to those that form the basis of Western music today. One of the most significant finds is the Hurrian hymn No. 6, a nearly complete piece of notated music found on a tablet from Ugarit in modern Syria, dating to around 1400 BC. It's dedicated to the goddess Nikkal. While the melody is preserved in cuneiform signs representing syllables and musical intervals, the exact interpretation of how to perform it, the rhythm, the tempo, the precise pitches, the vocal style, the instrumentation, is a massive scholarly puzzle. Archaeology has also unearthed stunning musical instruments, most famously the lyres of Ur, discovered in the royal cemetery of Ur, dating to around 2500 BC. These are beautifully crafted instruments, adorned with gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and intricate carvings, often featuring a bull's head. We also have evidence of harps, lutes, pipes, reed and flute-like, drums, and various percussion instruments like clappers and cymbals. These instruments clearly played a vital role in Mesopotamian society. Music was used in religious ceremonies to appease the gods and accompany rituals. It was part of courtly life for entertainment and an expression of royal power. Epic poems and myths were likely sung or chanted with musical accompaniment. There were professional musicians, both male and female, attached to temples and palaces. But what did this ancient music actually sound like? This is where we enter a world of intense scholarly debate and educated speculation. We can reconstruct the instruments based on archaeological remains. We can analyze the tuning instructions on the tablets and get an idea of the scales they used. We can even attempt to play the notated melodies like the Hurrian hymn. However, so much is missing. Cuneiform notation for music is far from comprehensive by modern standards. It might indicate intervals or melodic contours, but doesn't explicitly detail rhythm, dynamics, or ornamentation. The vocal techniques used for singing these hymns and epics are completely unknown. How were the instruments combined? What was the overall aesthetic? Was it solemn and stately, or vibrant and rhythmic? We simply don't have recordings from 4,000 years ago. When modern musicians and scholars attempt to perform reconstructions of Sumerian or Babylonian music, they are making many interpretations. They might draw analogies from later Middle Eastern musical traditions, or use mathematical models based on the tuning texts. The results can be fascinating, offering a glimpse into a possible sound world. But it's a filtered glimpse. The civilizations of Mesopotamia vanished. Their languages became dead languages for millennia, until cuneiform was deciphered in the 19th century. The continuous oral tradition that would have carried the nuances of their music was broken. So, while we stand in awe of the fact that we have written songs from so deep in the past, the actual experience of hearing that music as a Sumerian or Babylonian would have heard it, with all its cultural resonances, its precise timbres, its living spirit, remains in profound and enduring mystery. It's the ultimate lost soundscape, the very first musical thoughts of humanity, now only faintly audible across the vast gulf of time.